The small break room of Cafe Angelica fell silent as Sarah Miller collapsed into a metal folding chair, tears streaming down her pale face. Her slender fingers clutching a receipt so tightly that the edges crumpled. Her coworkers gathered around her in concern. But Sarah barely noticed them, her blue eyes fixed on the handwritten note on the check. "He knew," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Somehow, Pope Leo XIV knew exactly what I've been going through. How could he possibly have known about my mother?" The other waitresses exchanged confused glances as Sarah's shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Her blonde hair fell forward, partially hiding her tear-stained face as she read the note again, tracing the elegant handwriting with trembling fingers. The Pope's words seemed to glow on the paper. "Sarah, your smile hides great pain. Remember Philippians 4:13. Your mother's treatment costs are covered. God has not forgotten you." But how had this happened? How had the most influential religious leader in the world seen into the depths of her carefully guarded secret? But to understand how Sarah found herself breaking down in that break room, clutching a check that would change her life forever, we need to rewind to earlier that morning. The day had begun, like countless others in her 3 years of waitressing. The familiar routine of donning her black uniform, pulling her blonde hair into a neat ponytail, and applying just enough makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes from another sleepless night, worrying about bills. Sarah had arrived at Cafe Angelica 20 minutes early for her shift, as always. At 26, she was known for her reliability, her genuine smile, and her uncanny ability to remember regular customers' orders. The quaint cafe, with its warm lighting and exposed brick walls, was popular with both locals and tourists visiting their small town outside of Boston. For Sarah, it represented stability, predictable tips, and a manager who understood when she occasionally needed schedule adjustments for her mother's appointments. Today marked exactly 1 year since her mother's diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors had initially given her 6 months, but Patricia Miller was nothing if not a fighter. The experimental treatments were working, but the bills had mounted to catastrophic levels. Sarah's 2 jobs barely covered the minimum payments, and last night, the final notice had arrived. $17,000 needed within 30 days, or the treatments would stop. As Sarah tied her apron and prepared for the morning rush, she pushed away thoughts of the impossible sum. Her mother didn't know how dire their financial situation had become. Sarah had been protecting her, handling the calls from collection agencies, sorting through intimidating medical bills, even selling her car 3 months earlier. She plastered on her professional smile as the first customers arrived, determined to keep her worries from showing. "Order up for table 7, called Marco from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates of steaming Belgian waffles onto the counter. Sarah grabbed them deftly, balancing them on her arm as she filled water glasses with her free hand. The morning proceeded normally, the regular crowd of business people grabbing coffee, young mothers meeting for breakfast after school drop-off, retirees lingering over their newspapers and tea. Nothing suggested this day would be different from any other. The bell above the door chimed at precisely 9:42 a.m. Sarah was wiping down a recently vacated table when something made her look up. The usual ambient noise of the cafe, conversations, clinking silverware, the hiss of the espresso machine, seemed to fade as 3 men in dark suits entered. They surveyed the room with attentive eyes, their posture and alertness marking them as security personnel. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as a 4th figure appeared in the doorway. Even without the distinctive white cassock and zucchetto, there was no mistaking Pope Leo XIV. In his early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, the first American pope had become beloved worldwide for his humility and compassion. His unexpected election 3 years ago had shocked the world, as had his frequent departures from Vatican City to connect with ordinary people around the globe, often without extensive media coverage. The cafe manager, Elena, nearly dropped the stack of menus she was carrying as she recognized their visitor. She rushed forward, flustered but professional, welcoming the Pope and his small entourage. Sarah remained frozen by the table she had been cleaning, her cloth suspended mid-wipe as she watched Elena lead the group to a quiet corner booth. Section 3, her section. A mixture of anxiety and excitement fluttered in her stomach. "Sarah," Elena whispered urgently, passing by with a pitcher of water, "I'll take the Pope's table if you're uncomfortable." But Sarah shook her head. Despite her shock, some part of her felt a strange calm, almost a calling to serve this table. Perhaps it was her Catholic upbringing, or simply professional pride, but she straightened her shoulders and adjusted her name tag. "No, I've got it," she replied quietly, smoothing her apron with suddenly trembling hands. As Sarah approached the table, she noticed the security team had arranged themselves discreetly at nearby tables, alert but unobtrusive. The Pope himself sat with relaxed posture, listening intently to a middle-aged man across from him who appeared to be a local guide or assistant. Sarah took a steadying breath and stepped forward. "Good morning," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Welcome to Cafe Angelica. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you today." Pope Leo XIV looked up with a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. "Good morning, Sarah," he replied, his voice carrying a gentle authority that matched his kind expression. "What would you recommend to someone visiting your cafe for the first time?" The simple question, asked with genuine interest rather than mere politeness, caught Sarah slightly off guard. Most customers barely registered her presence, let alone sought her opinion or used her name. "Our berry compote French toast is wonderful," Sarah answered, finding her professional rhythm. "The chef makes the bread from scratch, and the berries are from a local farm." She continued with a few more recommendations, surprised at how natural the interaction felt despite her initial nervousness. The Pope listened attentively, nodding and thanking her before ordering a simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and coffee for himself and his companion. As Sarah placed their order with the kitchen, she noticed the entire staff peering through the service window, eager for a glimpse of their distinguished visitor. Marco, the cook, asked her in an excited whisper if the Pope had made special requests. "He ordered exactly what you'd expect from someone who grew up in a middle-class Boston neighborhood," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Simple food, politely requested with a genuine thank you." When she returned to the table with coffee, Sarah found Pope Leo XIV engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with his companion. The Pope paused as she approached, offering a grateful nod as she filled his cup. "Perfect timing," he said warmly. "Coffee makes difficult conversations easier, doesn't it?" The question seemed rhetorical, yet his eyes met hers with unexpected directness, as though he saw beyond her server's smile. For a fleeting moment, Sarah felt an inexplicable urge to tell this stranger everything, about her mother's cancer, the crushing medical bills, the second job she worked nights stocking shelves, the fear that kept her awake until dawn. The impulse was so strong that she actually opened her mouth before catching herself. "Yes," she managed instead, "it certainly does." Pope Leo XIV's gaze lingered for a moment longer, thoughtful and somehow knowing. Throughout their meal, Sarah maintained professional service, attentive without hovering, friendly without intruding. She noticed that despite the Pope's prominent position, he ate without ceremony, listened more than he spoke, and seemed genuinely present in each interaction. Once, when she approached with water refills, she overheard him discussing hospital ministry with his companion, mentioning a children's cancer ward he planned to visit later that day. The word cancer sent a jolt through Sarah's body, her hand trembling slightly as she poured water. A few drops splashed onto the tablecloth, and she quickly apologized, reaching for her serving cloth. "No need for apologies," Pope Leo XIV assured her gently. "Water dries." There was something in his tone, not just kindness but a deeper understanding, that made Sarah wonder if he had somehow noticed her reaction to the topic of their conversation. As she wiped the small spill, the Pope asked unexpectedly, "Are you from this area originally, Sarah?" The simple question, delivered with genuine interest, caught her by surprise. "Yes," she answered. "Born and raised about 15 minutes from here. My mother and I have lived in the same house my whole life." She hadn't intended to mention her mother, yet the words slipped out naturally in response to his gentle inquiry. "And your mother, is she well?" Pope Leo XIV asked, the question carrying a weight Sarah couldn't fully understand. She hesitated, unaccustomed to discussing personal matters with customers, yet something in his compassionate expression made deflection feel impossible. "She's fighting," Sarah admitted quietly. "Cancer, for about a year now." The words hung in the air between them, the first time she'd spoken so directly about her mother's illness to anyone outside the hospital in months. A shadow of genuine concern crossed the Pope's face. "I'm very sorry to hear that," he said, his voice carrying a depth of empathy that suggested he truly meant it. Cancer is a difficult journey, for both the patient and those who love them. He didn't offer platitudes or religious cliches, just acknowledgement of the struggle. "If you don't mind my asking, what is your mother's name?" "Patricia," Sarah replied, surprised at herself for continuing this conversation in the middle of her shift. "Patricia Miller." She glanced around, suddenly aware that other customers might need her, but Elena caught her eye from across the room and gave a subtle nod of permission to continue. The cafe manager seemed to understand the unusual nature of this interaction and was giving her space for it. "Patricia," the Pope repeated thoughtfully, "would it be all right if I pray for her?" The question was asked simply, without presumption or performance, just one person offering what they could to another. Sarah felt unexpected emotions rising in her throat. "She would like that very much," she managed to say. "She's Catholic, though I haven't been to Mass much lately." The admission carried a weight of guilt she hadn't intended to reveal. Pope Leo XIV's expression remained free of judgment. "God understands when our paths take detours, especially during difficult times," he said gently. "Sometimes carrying the burden of caring for others leaves little energy for formal worship. That doesn't mean your spirit isn't faithful in its own way." His words touched something deep within Sarah, a wound she hadn't realized needed healing, the guilt of her spiritual absence during this hardest of years. Their conversation was interrupted as Elena approached the table, apologetically informing Sarah that one of her other tables needed attention. Sarah nodded, gathering herself back into her professional demeanor. "I should get back to work," she said to the Pope. "Thank you for your kindness." He smiled in understanding, and as she turned away, she heard him ask his companion about the local hospital where he would be visiting later. For the remainder of their meal, Sarah provided attentive service while maintaining professional distance, still somewhat shaken by the unexpected personal turn their earlier exchange had taken. The Pope and his companion ate unhurriedly, discussing what seemed to be the day's schedule in quiet tones. Several customers had realized who was in their midst, casting curious glances toward the corner booth, but respectfully maintaining distance. When it came time for the check, Sarah printed it with slightly trembling hands. For some reason, this simple transaction felt significant, a closing chapter to this brief but meaningful encounter. She slid the leather folder onto the table with a quiet, "Whenever you're ready, no rush at all." Pope Leo XIV thanked her with another warm smile before returning to his conversation, and Sarah moved on to her other tables. 10 minutes later, Sarah noticed the Pope's companion signaling that they were ready to leave. She returned to the table, where the leather folder awaited with a credit card neatly tucked inside. "I'll be right back with your receipt," she said, collecting the folder. In the back office, she ran the card, a Vatican City diplomatic account, and returned the slip for signature, all standard procedure. As Pope Leo XIV handed back the signed receipt, he looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "Sarah, I want to thank you not just for the meal, but for your presence. Sometimes God speaks most clearly through those who serve others with dignity despite their own burdens." His words were pitched low, meant only for her ears. "May I leave something for you as well?" He held out a sealed envelope with her name handwritten on the front. Surprised and slightly confused, Sarah accepted the envelope. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure of the appropriate protocol for such a moment. Was this a religious token? A prayer card? The Pope stood, his companion and security detail seamlessly moving into position around him. Other patrons began to notice the movement, several rising respectfully as the religious leader prepared to depart. "Remember, Sarah," Pope Leo XIV said quietly as he turned to leave, "even in our darkest moments we are seen. Your mother Patricia is in my prayers today." With those words and a final gentle smile, he moved toward the door, his security detail creating a protective formation around him. The cafe's other customers watched in respectful silence as the small group departed, the bell above the door chiming softly as it closed behind them. For several moments, Sarah stood motionless, the envelope in her hand forgotten as she processed the Pope's parting words. How had he remembered her mother's name after just one brief mention? And something in his tone, a certainty, a reassurance, had left her with a strange sense of comfort she couldn't quite explain. The spell was broken only when Elena approached, her expression a mixture of awe and curiosity. "Sarah, do you realize you just had a personal conversation with the Pope?" Elena asked in an excited whisper. "What did he give you?" She gestured to the envelope still clutched in Sarah's hand. Sarah looked down, suddenly remembering the Pope's parting gift. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stationery, with just Sarah written in elegant blue ink on the front. Her name in the Pope's handwriting. The strangeness of this reality struck her anew. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, running her finger along the sealed edge. "He just handed it to me before leaving." She was hesitant to open it there in the middle of the dining room, with curious eyes now turning toward her. This moment, whatever it contained, felt intensely personal. Elena seemed to understand, squeezing her shoulder supportively. "Take 5 minutes in the break room if you want some privacy," she offered kindly. Sarah nodded gratefully and made her way to the small employee break room at the back of the cafe. The space was mercifully empty, everyone still engaged with the breakfast rush. She sat at the wobbly table, turning the envelope over in her hands. Something substantial was inside, more than just a note or prayer card. Taking a deep breath, she carefully broke the seal and opened the flap. Inside was a handwritten letter on formal Vatican stationery and, more surprisingly, a check. Sarah's eyes widened as she registered the amount written in crisp blue ink. $50,000. Her hands began to tremble so badly that she nearly dropped the paper. $50,000, more than enough to cover her mother's outstanding medical bills and the next round of treatments. Her vision blurred with sudden tears as she turned to the letter. "Dear Sarah," the note began in the same elegant handwriting that had addressed the envelope. "During our brief interaction, I felt God's prompting to share with you. While visiting Boston, I learned of a foundation that assists families affected by cancer. Your mother's name, Patricia Miller, will be added to their recipient list, beginning with the enclosed amount. This is not charity but recognition of God's children, supporting one another in times of need." The letter continued, explaining that the foundation would contact her about ongoing support through her mother's treatment journey. It was signed simply, plus Leo 14th, with a small cross drawn before the signature. Sarah read the words 3 times, trying to comprehend what was happening. How had he arranged this so quickly? How did he even know about her mother's medical bills? She hadn't mentioned their financial struggles or the deadline they were facing. Beneath the Pope's signature was a scripture reference, Philippians 4:13-14. With shaking hands, Sarah pulled out her phone and searched for the passage. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles." The second verse about sharing in troubles struck her particularly. It seemed to speak directly to this unexpected act of support during her family's darkest hour. Tears flowed freely now as the full impact of what had just happened began to register. The crushing weight of financial worry that had become her constant companion suddenly lifted. Her mother could continue treatments without interruption. The threatening calls would stop. The impossible choice between medicine and bankruptcy had vanished in a single, inexplicable moment of divine timing and human compassion. Sarah's thoughts raced back through her interaction with Pope Leo XIV, searching for clues about how he could have known their specific situation. She had mentioned her mother's cancer, yes, but nothing about their financial struggles or the looming deadline. Yet somehow, he had known precisely what they needed and exactly when they needed it. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Everything okay?" Sarah realized she had been in the break room longer than the promised 5 minutes. She quickly tucked the check and letter back into the envelope, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Coming back now," she texted. unsure how to even begin explaining what had just happened. How could she return to serving pancakes and coffee when her entire world had just shifted on its axis? She splashed cold water on her face in the small employee bathroom, trying to compose herself before returning to the floor. Her reflection showed red-rimmed eyes, but also something new, a lightness that hadn't been there in months. Sarah tucked the envelope securely into her apron pocket, its weight a constant reminder that what had just transpired was real, not some desperate dream conjured by her exhausted mind. For the remainder of her shift, Sarah moved through her duties in a state of stunned gratitude. Regular customers noticed her reddened eyes and asked if she was all right. Better than all right, she found herself answering with her first genuine smile in months. Something amazing just happened. She shared no details, still processing the miracle herself, still half afraid that speaking it aloud might somehow make it disappear. During her lunch break, Sarah sat in her car and called the financial office at her mother's treatment center. With the envelope open on her lap, she explained that she would be bringing in a payment to clear the outstanding balance. The representative sounded shocked. They had spoken just yesterday about the final notice. "There's been an unexpected blessing," Sarah explained simply, her voice catching. "A financial gift specifically from my mother's treatment." Next, she called her mother, carefully considering how much to share. Patricia Miller had been sheltered from the worst of their financial reality, Sarah bearing that burden alone to protect her from additional stress during treatment. "Mom, I have amazing news," she began, her voice steadier now. "Someone has made a donation to cover your medical expenses." She decided not to mention the Pope directly, wanting to explain that extraordinary detail in person. Patricia's response was stunned silence followed by a soft, "How? Who would do such a thing?" The disbelief in her mother's voice mirrored Sarah's own continuing shock. "Someone who believes your life is worth fighting for," Sarah answered, tears threatening again. "I'll explain everything when I get home tonight. But Mom, we're going to be okay. Your treatments are covered." The weight of those words, the promise they contained, filled the car with palpable relief. When her shift ended at 4 p.m., Sarah's manager, Elena, pulled her aside. "You look like you've seen a miracle," she observed quietly. "Did it have something to do with what the Pope gave you?" Sarah nodded, not yet ready to share the full story, but needing to acknowledge the extraordinary nature of what had happened. "He somehow knew exactly what my family needed," she admitted. "I can't explain it, but it's changed everything." Elena squeezed her hand understandingly. "Some things don't need explanation," she said. "Just gratitude." The simple wisdom in her manager's words resonated deeply. Sarah was still struggling to comprehend the how and why of the morning's events, but the profound gratitude she felt was uncomplicated and overwhelming. "Take tomorrow off if you need it," Elena added. "Family comes first." Sarah thanked her with a quick hug before heading to her car. The 20-minute drive to her mother's house felt surreal. The same route she had traveled thousands of times now seemed different somehow, as if the familiar landscape had been transformed by the events of the day. The late afternoon sunlight cast a golden glow over the neighborhoods she passed, beautiful in a way she hadn't noticed in months. Sarah realized how much her financial anxiety had blinded her to everyday beauty. Patricia Miller was sitting in her favorite armchair by the front window when Sarah arrived, a colorful scarf wrapped around her head to cover the hair loss from chemotherapy. Despite her frail appearance, her eyes brightened as her daughter entered. "Tell me everything," she said immediately, setting aside the book she'd been reading. "Your call sounded like something out of a storybook. Who would possibly donate that kind of money for my treatment?" Sarah sat on the ottoman facing her mother, the envelope still in her hand. "You're not going to believe this," she began, but Pope Leo XIV came into the cafe this morning. Patricia's eyes widened in disbelief, her hand moving to her throat in surprise. "The Pope? In your cafe?" Sarah nodded, a small laugh escaping at the absurdity of it all. "He sat in my section, ordered eggs and toast, and somehow, I still don't understand how, he knew about our situation." She handed the envelope to her mother, watching as Patricia carefully extracted the letter and checked with trembling fingers. Her mother's expression transformed from confusion to shock to overwhelming emotion as she read the Pope's words. "This can't be real," she whispered, looking up at Sarah with tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "How could he possibly know? We've never met. We've never applied to any Vatican foundation." "That's what I keep asking myself," Sarah admitted, kneeling beside her mother's chair and taking her thin hand. "We barely spoke about your illness. I only mentioned you had cancer, not anything about our financial situation or the deadline we're facing." Sarah hesitated, then shared the detail that had been haunting her since morning. "Mom, he knew your name. He said, 'Your mother Patricia is in my prayers today.' But I only mentioned your name once, in passing." Patricia, a lifelong Catholic whose faith had only deepened during her illness, shook her head in wonder. "The Holy Spirit," she said simply, her voice filled with conviction. "Sometimes God allows certain people to see what others cannot, to know needs that haven't been spoken." She traced the small cross before the Pope's signature with a reverent finger. "To think that the Holy Father himself is praying for me. Sarah, this is more precious even than the financial help." Sarah hadn't expected this reaction, that her mother would find the prayers more significant than the financial rescue. But watching Patricia's face, luminous with spiritual joy despite her physical weakness, Sarah began to understand. The money solved their practical crisis, but the knowledge that they had been specifically seen and cared for by God, through his representative on earth, addressed a deeper human need for meaning within suffering. "Patricia, read the scripture reference aloud." Philippians 4:13-14. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles." She looked up at Sarah with fresh tears. "That second verse, about sharing in troubles, that's what the Pope has done, isn't it? Not just sending money, but truly seeing our struggle and entering into it with us through his prayers and concern." Sarah nodded, her own understanding deepening as her mother spoke. "He saw me, Mom, not just as a waitress serving his breakfast, but really saw me, the worry I've been carrying, the fear, the exhaustion, and instead of just leaving a nice tip or saying something polite, he actually did something that changed our situation completely." The magnitude of this recognition, being truly seen in her struggle, felt almost as significant as the financial help. Together they examined the letter again, noting the contact information for the foundation that would be reaching out. "We should call right away," Sarah suggested, practical concerns returning. "Make sure this is all properly processed." Patricia agreed, though her expression suggested she had no doubts about the legitimacy of what had transpired. Her faith allowed her to accept the extraordinary nature of their blessing without the skepticism that still lingered at the edges of Sarah's consciousness. Patricia insisted on making the call herself, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks as she spoke with the foundation representative. Sarah listened as the woman on the other end confirmed everything. Pope Leo XIV had indeed contacted them that morning about the Miller family. Arrangements had already been made with the treatment center, and yes, the check was genuine. Additional support would be provided throughout Patricia's remaining treatment journey. After ending the call, Patricia sat in stunned silence for several moments before looking up at her daughter with renewed determination. "Tomorrow," she declared, "I want to go to morning mass. It's been too long, and now I have so much to be thankful for." Sarah nodded in agreement, remembering the Pope's gentle words about God understanding when paths take detours. Perhaps it was time for both of them to find their way back to spiritual practices that had once anchored their lives. As evening settled around their small house, Sarah prepared a simple dinner, moving around the familiar kitchen with lighter steps than she had in months. The constant knot of anxiety that had lived between her shoulder blades had loosened, allowing her to stand straighter, breathe deeper. She realized how physically manifested her financial stress had become, wearing her body down alongside her spirit. Over dinner, Patricia shared memories of attending a papal mass decades earlier during Pope John Paul II's visit to Boston. "I never imagined that a pope would one day know my name, let alone provide for my medical care," she marveled, her appetite better than it had been in weeks. "God truly works in mysterious ways, Sarah. Even through all these months of illness, I've tried to trust that he hasn't forgotten us. Today feels like confirmation of that faith." Sarah listened, struck by her mother's unwavering spiritual certainty, even during their darkest moments. While Sarah had found herself questioning why a loving God would allow such suffering, Patricia had maintained a quiet confidence that purpose existed even within pain. Today's events seemed to validate her mother's perspective in ways Sarah was still processing. The idea that they had been specifically remembered and seen by God felt both comforting and overwhelming. After dinner, as they sat together in the living room, Sarah found herself wondering about Pope Leo XIV's schedule. "He mentioned visiting a children's cancer ward today," she recalled. "I wonder if he does this kind of thing regularly. These personal acts of kindness that change people's lives." She pictured other families receiving similar unexpected blessings, other burdens being lifted, through encounters that seemed random but perhaps weren't random at all. "The news mainly covers his public appearances and official statements," Patricia noted, "but I suspect these private moments of compassion happen more often than we hear about. That's the essence of true Christian service, doing good without publicity or recognition." She paused, considering. "Though I do wish we could thank him properly. A note seems inadequate for what he's done for us." Sarah agreed, though she wondered if the Pope's actions had been purposefully designed to prevent direct thanks. The Foundation would handle ongoing communication, creating a degree of separation that perhaps allowed him to help without drawing attention to himself as the source. There was humility in this approach that aligned with everything she had observed during their brief interaction. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah slept deeply and dreamlessly, without waking to worry about bills or treatment options. The envelope with the Pope's letter rested on her bedside table, the last thing she saw before closing her eyes. She had taken a photo of both the letter and check, still half afraid that they might somehow disappear by morning, revealing the entire experience as an elaborate dream born of desperation. But morning arrived with sunlight streaming through her childhood bedroom window, and the envelope remained, tangible proof of the previous day's miracle. Sarah reached for her phone, finding a text from Elena. "Hope you're taking today off as suggested. The Pope's visit is all over social media, but I haven't mentioned your personal interaction to anyone. That's your story to tell if and when you choose." Sarah appreciated her manager's discretion. The idea of their private blessing becoming public knowledge felt somehow inappropriate, diminishing the sacred nature of what had transpired. Celebrity culture would likely focus on the famous man who had performed the kind act, rather than the God who had guided him. Sarah texted back a simple thank you, confirming she would indeed take the day off to accompany her mother to morning mass. St. Catherine's Church was only partially filled for the 9 a.m. weekday service, mostly elderly parishioners and a few young mothers with preschool-aged children. Sarah helped Patricia to a pew near the front, conscious of how her mother's appearance had changed since they had last attended together. The weight loss and headscarf marked her visibly as someone in the midst of cancer treatment, yet Patricia held herself with dignity as she knelt in prayer. Father Michael, who had known their family for years, smiled in pleased surprise when he spotted them before Mass began. He made his way over to greet them warmly, clasping Patricia's thin hands in his own. "It's wonderful to see you here," he said sincerely. "How are you feeling?" His question carried genuine concern beyond mere politeness. He had visited Patricia in the hospital after her initial diagnosis and had been keeping her in the parish prayer list. "Better today than I've been in a long time, Father," Patricia replied with a smile that reached her eyes. "Something extraordinary happened yesterday. I'll tell you after Mass." The priest nodded, respecting her desire to focus on worship before sharing her news. As he moved away to prepare for the service, Sarah noticed her mother close her eyes in silent prayer, her expression serene in a way it hadn't been since before her diagnosis. The simple weekday Mass proceeded with familiar rhythms, prayers, readings, responses that Sarah knew by heart despite her months of absence. She found comfort in these ancient patterns, her lips forming words she had recited since childhood. When Father Michael read from Philippians in the day's scripture, though it was a different passage than the one the Pope had referenced, both Sarah and Patricia exchanged meaningful glances, feeling the connection to their recent blessing. During his brief homily, Father Michael spoke about recognizing God's presence in unexpected encounters and everyday moments. Sometimes divine intervention comes through surprising channels, he said, reminding us that we are never forgotten, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Though he couldn't have known about their experience with Pope Leo XIV, his words seemed almost directly addressed to their situation. Another thread in the tapestry of meaning being woven around them. After Mass concluded, several parishioners approached Patricia, expressing delight at seeing her back in church and asking about her treatment progress. Sarah observed her mother's interactions with new appreciation, noting how this community had held them in prayer even during their physical absence. Connections remained intact, care continued flowing, even when they had been unable to participate actively in church life. When the church had mostly emptied, Father Michael invited them to his office. Over cups of tea, Patricia shared the extraordinary events of the previous day, the Pope's visit to Cafe Angelica, his interaction with Sarah, and the unexpected financial blessing that had followed. The priest listened with widening eyes, occasionally shaking his head in amazed disbelief. "In all my years of ministry," he said when they finished, "I've witnessed many moments of grace, but this is truly remarkable." "What I still don't understand," Sarah admitted, voicing the question that had been circling in her mind since yesterday, "is how he knew. How did Pope Leo XIV know about our specific situation when I barely mentioned my mother's illness and said nothing about our financial struggles?" She looked between Father Michael and her mother, seeking insight from their deeper faith perspectives. "It seems beyond coincidence, beyond even educated guessing." Father Michael considered her question thoughtfully before responding. "The Church has long recognized that certain individuals may be granted special charisms, spiritual gifts that allow them to perceive needs or truths not immediately apparent to others. Throughout history, saints and spiritual leaders have demonstrated unusual discernment or knowledge that couldn't be explained by natural means." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Pope Leo XIV has developed a reputation for such spiritual sensitivity. There have been stories," he continued, "mostly shared privately rather than reported in media, about his ability to sometimes know things he couldn't possibly know through ordinary channels, specific details about people's lives or struggles that help him minister to them more effectively. The Vatican has been characteristically cautious about such accounts, neither confirming nor denying them, allowing them to remain in the realm of personal testimony rather than official claims." Sarah considered this information, finding it both comforting and unsettling. The idea that her innermost struggles had been supernaturally perceived felt like a profound vulnerability. Yet the result had been such compassionate intervention that she couldn't view it as an invasion. "So he might have been given some kind of spiritual insight into our specific need?" she asked, still struggling to fully comprehend this explanation. "That would align with similar accounts," Father Michael confirmed. "Though I would add that such gifts are always understood within our faith as tools for service, never for personal gain or attention. They're given to enable more effective ministry to those in need, which certainly seems to be how Pope Leo XIV has used whatever insight he was granted in your case." The priest's explanation helped Sarah contextualize their experience within a larger spiritual framework. Patricia, who had been listening quietly, added her perspective. When he was elected, many commentators noted his unusual combination of administrative skill and pastoral sensitivity. Some called him a pope of discernment, suggesting he had a particular gift for understanding the heart of matters and people beyond superficial appearances. She paused, touching the cross hanging around her neck. "I believe God sometimes allows certain people to become instruments of his direct intervention in our lives." As they left the church, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. The financial burden that had consumed her for months was lifted, but something more profound had shifted within her as well. The experience had reconnected her with a sense of being part of something larger than herself. a community of faith, a spiritual reality where genuine miracles could still occur. The world appeared different somehow, charged with deeper meaning and possibility. That afternoon, Sarah accompanied her mother to her oncology appointment. The atmosphere in the treatment center felt different than during their previous visits, the cloud of financial anxiety no longer hovering over them, allowing space for hope to expand. The oncologist reviewed Patricia's latest test results with cautious optimism, noting that she was responding well to the current protocol. "I'm glad we can continue without interruption," he added, unaware of how close they had come to having treatment suspended. While Patricia received her infusion, a hospital administrator approached Sarah in the waiting area. "Miss Miller? I wanted to let you know that we've received communication from the St. Clair Foundation regarding your mother's treatment." The woman seemed slightly puzzled as she continued. "They've not only covered the outstanding balance, but have established an account for all future expenses related to her care. This is quite extraordinary. The foundation rarely gets involved with individual cases at this level." Sarah nodded, unsure how much to explain about their connection to the foundation. "We're very grateful," she said simply. The administrator hesitated, clearly curious, but professional discretion prevented further questions. She provided Sarah with paperwork confirming the financial arrangements, the official documentation, making yesterday's miracle feel even more concrete and real. Patricia would receive the best possible care without financial constraints, a privilege few cancer patients experienced. As Sarah filed the paperwork in her mother's medical folder, her phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert showed Pope Leo XIV visiting the children's cancer ward at Boston Memorial Hospital, just as he had mentioned during his breakfast at the cafe. The accompanying photo showed him kneeling beside a young girl's hospital bed, his expression reflecting the same genuine compassion Sarah had witnessed firsthand. His public ministry and their private blessing were aligned in authentic care for those suffering. That evening, as local news covered the Pope's visit to Boston, Sarah and Patricia watched from their living room. The coverage focused on his public appearances and official statements, with brief mentions of his hospital visits. Nothing was said about private acts of charity or individual encounters, confirming Sarah's sense that their blessing had been part of a pattern of quiet compassion that occurred beyond media attention. This seemed fitting somehow, sacred moments protected from becoming public spectacle. 3 days later, representatives from the St. Clair Foundation contacted them to arrange a consultation. 2 compassionate professionals visited their home, explaining the comprehensive support system now available to them, not only covering medical expenses, but also providing access to nutritional support, home care assistance, and counseling services. "Our mission is to address the whole person and family, not just the disease," explained Maria, the foundation's care coordinator. Sarah listened with growing amazement as Maria outlined resources she hadn't known existed. "The foundation was established 15 years ago with Vatican support," Maria explained, "but operates independently, serving patients regardless of religious affiliation. We maintain a low public profile to focus resources on care rather than publicity." Her description aligned with the Pope's approach: substance over appearance, genuine service without drawing attention to the provider. When Sarah asked directly about Pope Leo XIV's involvement, Maria smiled gently. "We have a special referral category for cases that come to us directly from the Holy Father. They're prioritized for immediate assistance." She hesitated, then added quietly, "If I may speak personally rather than professionally for a moment, such referrals have increased significantly during his papacy. He seems to have a particular concern for families facing medical crises, especially cancer." This information deepened Sarah's appreciation for what had occurred. Their blessing wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of compassionate intervention extending beyond their particular situation. The Pope had created systems to multiply his personal ministry, transforming individual encounters into sustainable support. What might have been a one-time financial gift instead became ongoing care through an established foundation with extended reach. That night, Sarah found herself writing a letter to Pope Leo XIV. Though uncertain if he would ever read her words, she needed to express what his intervention had meant, not just the practical relief of financial burden, but the deeper gift of renewed faith and hope. "You saw me when I felt invisible," she wrote, and reminded me that God sees me too. The miracle wasn't just the check, but being truly recognized in my struggle when I thought no one noticed. As weeks passed, Patricia's health began to improve noticeably. Her doctors attributed this partly to the reduced stress. Financial anxiety had been taking a physical toll beyond what either woman had realized. With comprehensive support in place, Patricia could focus entirely on healing, her natural resilience reasserting itself as external pressures diminished. Her energy increased gradually, allowing for longer periods of activity between necessary rest. Sarah reduced her work schedule to a single job, the cafe during morning shifts only, giving her afternoons and evenings with her mother. The foundation's support meant this choice didn't create financial hardship. Without the crushing weight of unpayable bills, Sarah rediscovered joys that had been set aside during crisis. Reading novels in the evening, tending the small garden behind their house, occasionally meeting friends for coffee rather than only for necessary errands. The transformation extended beyond their household. Sarah and Patricia became volunteers with the cancer support group at St. Catherine's, sharing their experience of unexpected blessing during difficulty. They never publicized the details of Pope Leo XIV's personal involvement, keeping that aspect private, but spoke openly about the Foundation's support and the importance of maintaining hope even in seemingly impossible circumstances. Sarah's letter to Pope Leo XIV received an unexpected response 3 months later, a handwritten note on simple stationery expressing joy at her mother's improving health and assuring both women of his continued prayers. The personal reply, delivered through the Foundation, rather than official Vatican channels, reflected the same genuine concern and attention that had characterized their brief encounter at Cafe Angelica. Father Michael invited Patricia, now strong enough for more active participation, to speak to the parish about her journey of faith through illness. Her testimony emphasized not the material assistance they had received, but the spiritual lesson of being seen by God through human instruments of compassion. The greatest healing wasn't physical or financial, she told the congregation, but the restoration of hope when we most needed to remember we weren't forgotten. 1 year after Pope Leo XIV's visit to Cafe Angelica, Patricia received the news they had been praying for: complete remission. Her oncologist called it remarkably successful treatment response, while Patricia simply called it a miracle. The medical team continued monitoring her closely, but preliminary indicators suggested the aggressive cancer that had once threatened her life had responded completely to treatment. To celebrate this milestone, Sarah and Patricia made a decision together. They would travel to Rome and attend a general papal audience. The Foundation helped arrange accessible accommodations suitable for Patricia's still recovering condition. The journey would serve as both pilgrimage of gratitude and celebration of healing, marking their transition from crisis to recovery with spiritual significance. Standing among thousands in St. Peter's Square, they had no expectation of personal recognition. They were simply two faces in an enormous crowd gathered to receive the Pope's blessing. Sarah held her mother's arm supportively as they waited, both women overwhelmed by the magnitude of the setting and the journey that had brought them there. The square buzzed with anticipation as people from around the world gathered, many holding photos of loved ones or objects to be blessed. When Pope Leo XIV appeared, moving slowly along the barriers to greet pilgrims, the crowd surged forward with enthusiasm. Patricia and Sarah remained in their assigned section, content to witness from a distance. They had come for the blessing and experience, not expecting private audience. The enormity of the gathering confirmed what they already understood. Their personal miracle had been one of countless compassionate interventions occurring beyond public awareness. Yet as the Pope moved through the crowd, something remarkable happened. He paused suddenly, scanning the assembled faces with unusual focus. A Vatican aide leaned close, listening as the Pope spoke quietly, then used a radio to communicate with security personnel. Moments later, an official approached Sarah and Patricia. "His Holiness has asked to meet you," he said simply. "Please come with me." Stunned, they followed him through the crowd toward the barriers where Pope Leo XIV waited. Sarah and Patricia Miller, Pope Leo XIV greeted them warmly, reaching across the barrier to clasp their hands. "What joy to see you both here, and you looking so well, Patricia." His genuine pleasure at their presence left both women momentarily speechless. The crowd around them watched curiously, unaware of the previous connection between the Pope and these two American women, one young and one middle-aged, who had somehow warranted special recognition. "Your Holiness," Patricia finally managed, her voice thick with emotion, "we came to thank you in person. Not just for the financial help, though that changed everything for us, but for seeing us when we felt forgotten. For reminding us that God knew our needs even when we couldn't see a way forward." Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she expressed the gratitude they had carried across an ocean to deliver. Pope Leo XIV listened with the same attentive presence Sarah remembered from the cafe, his focus complete despite the thousands of people surrounding them. "It is God who sees. I am merely his instrument," he responded gently. "Your faith through difficulty has been an inspiration to many. The Foundation tells me you've been helping other families navigate their cancer journeys." His awareness of their volunteer work back home confirmed his continued connection to their story. Sarah found her voice at last. "You changed more than our circumstances," she told him earnestly. "You changed how I understand faith itself. I used to think God was distant during our hardest times, but now I see he was working through people like you who pay attention to his promptings." The Pope nodded, seeming to recognize the deeper transformation she was describing. Not just practical help received, but spiritual perspective fundamentally shifted. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes before the Pope needed to continue his procession through the crowd. But before moving on, he placed his hands on Patricia's shoulders in blessing. "Your healing brings great joy," he said warmly. "Remember always that you are seen, known, and loved, not for anything you accomplish, but simply because you are a beloved child of God. That truth remains constant in both illness and health." As they watched him continue down the line, blessing and greeting other pilgrims with the same authentic presence he had shown them, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey from that morning in Cafe Angelica to this moment in St. Peter's Square. A simple encounter over breakfast had cascaded into complete transformation, medical, financial, spiritual, changing their lives in ways neither woman could have imagined before Pope Leo XIV had noticed an exhausted waitress carrying hidden burdens. Back in Boston, their story remained largely private, known only to close friends and fellow church members. Sarah had been approached by local media after someone recognized them in footage from the papal audience, but she declined interviews, preferring to protect the sacred nature of their experience. The most meaningful aspects, being truly seen in their suffering, experiencing divine intervention through human compassion, seemed too profound for sound bites or headlines. Sarah continued working at Cafe Angelica, though now by choice rather than desperate necessity. The corner booth where Pope Leo XIV had sat remained unremarkable to most customers, just another table in a pleasant neighborhood cafe. Yet for Sarah, it had become a daily reminder that ordinary spaces could become sanctuaries of divine encounter, that routine interactions might become channels of life-changing grace when people remained attentive to spiritual promptings. Patricia's recovery progressed steadily, her strength returning more fully with each passing month. She became an active volunteer with both the parish outreach ministry and the St. Clair Foundation, using her experience to support others facing similar challenges. "Cancer showed me my fragility," she often told those newly diagnosed, "but it also revealed God's faithfulness through the compassion of others. We are never as alone as we sometimes feel." For Sarah, the transformation continued unfolding in unexpected ways. Her restored faith expressed itself less in religious activities than in heightened awareness of others who might be silently struggling as she once had. She became more attentive to subtle signs of exhaustion or worry in people she encountered, more willing to ask genuine questions and listen deeply to responses. Her own experience of being seen had awakened new capacity to truly see others. The financial security, established through the Foundation's intervention, allowed Sarah to finally return to college, completing the business degree she had abandoned when her mother first became ill. She continued working part-time at the cafe while studying, maintaining connection with the community that had supported them through their darkest days. Her career goals had shifted toward nonprofit management, inspired by the model of compassionate service she had witnessed through the St. Clair Foundation. 3 years after Pope Leo XIV's visit to Cafe Angelica, Sarah and Patricia hosted a small gathering at their home to celebrate dual milestones: Patricia's 3rd anniversary of remission and Sarah's college graduation. Friends from church, colleagues from the cafe, and fellow volunteers from the cancer support group filled their modest living room, representing the expanded community that had emerged from their journey through crisis and blessing. Father Michael offered a blessing before the meal, acknowledging the journey they had traveled together. "We gather today to celebrate healing that extends beyond the physical, the restoration of hope, the strengthening of faith, the expansion of community," he said, his words resonating with all present. Sarah and Patricia's story reminds us that divine intervention often comes through human hands, that we may all be called to become instruments of grace for one another. As conversations flowed around their dining table, Sarah found herself reflecting on how completely their lives had been transformed by a single encounter. The financial rescue had been immediate and dramatic, yet the more profound changes had unfolded gradually over time: renewed faith, expanded purpose, deeper capacity for compassion. What had begun as a desperate crisis had somehow become the foundation for more meaningful living than either woman had known before. Have you ever felt truly seen in your moment of greatest struggle? Has an unexpected encounter ever changed the course of your life when hope seemed lost? Sarah and Patricia's experience with Pope Leo XIV reminds us that divine intervention often comes through human compassion, that seemingly random interactions may be divinely orchestrated responses to unspoken needs. The miracle wasn't just the financial provision, but the restoration of dignity that comes from being recognized in suffering and remembered in prayer. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe in the power of compassionate attention to change lives in their darkest moments.